90 billion for Ukraine will be provided. Hungary has lifted its veto. The mechanism has been launched, but Slovakia is putting forward new conditions. A new Italian Putin's horse has appeared in the EU. Russian air defense has once again destroyed a high-rise building. Many casualties. There is less and less cannon fodder. Russians no longer want to die for Putin, and a rebellion is brewing. The Magyar is changing the course of the war. The Kremlin is in panic. Meanwhile, in the temporarily occupied territories, the Russians continue their racketeering. Russian authorities are seizing and registering as ownerless tens of thousands of apartments and houses belonging to Ukrainians who left because of the war and occupation. These are today's news. My name is Eva Nikolashvili. Like and subscribe because we're starting right now. Hungary has lifted its veto on 90 billion euros of aid to Ukraine, as well as on the 20th package of sanctions against the Russian Federation. The decision was approved by the ambassadors of the EU countries. This was reported by Suspilne. A representative of Cyprus's presidency in the European Council told the publication about the launch of the written procedure to approve the allocation of funds. This is a necessary procedure for final approval, which is expected to be completed tomorrow, April 23rd, in the second half of the day. The informal EU summit is scheduled for April 23rd through 24th in Cyprus. The meeting will be devoted not only to Ukraine, but also to the broader context of international security, in particular the war in the Middle East, the situation in Iran, and the related energy risks for Europe. Neither Ukraine nor Slovakia are opposed to unblocking the 90 billion, but sanctions are a more complicated issue. According to The Guardian, Slovak Prime Minister Robert Fico stated that they will not object to unblocking the loan for Ukraine, but will wait with the 20th package of EU sanctions. They will support the restrictions after the restoration of oil transit through the Druzhba pipeline. According to Fico, Hungary and Slovakia's insistence on freezing the funds prompted Ukraine to take quicker action to repair the pipeline. At the same time, the Slovak Prime Minister also stated that this process has allegedly undermined trust between Bratislava and Kyiv. And now he claims he fears that Ukraine may soon look for a way to stop oil deliveries again. Pro-Russian forces have come to power in Bulgaria. What threat does this pose to Ukraine? Will Bulgaria become the Kremlin's new Trojan horse in the European Union, following the example of Orban's Hungary?
Europe is once again confronting a significant internal challenge. Bulgaria is now finally starting to turn toward Moscow.
There is a distinct and real possibility of the formation of a coalition that will definitely not be pro-Ukrainian.
In the parliamentary elections, the political force Progressive Bulgaria, associated with Rumen Radev, claimed victory. These are politicians who criticize EU policy and advocate for restoring dialogue with Russia.
Europe does not have its own vision for ending the war in Ukraine and establishing peace, and continues to invest in a doomed cause with utopian hope. Rumen Radev, head of the Progressive Bulgaria Party.
And although Sofia does not formally abandon its European course, the focus is beginning to shift. The conversation is no longer about unconditional support for allies, but about so-called pragmatism, which in the current circumstances increasingly means an attempt to balance between the EU and the Kremlin.
Will the new Bulgarian government decide to follow the path set by Viktor Orban? The answer is no, but then again, it can definitely create a significant amount of trouble for the region.
According to experts, Sofia will not openly block key EU decisions. However, this government can no longer be called pro-Ukrainian, which means that any agreement, from sanctions to financial aid, risks becoming more complicated, longer, and politically more painful.
They can definitely cause us financial troubles. They can definitely create political issues for us. Some things, such as sanctions, will be harder to coordinate. It's unlikely that the Bulgarians will directly sabotage the approval of a loan for us, such a necessary one. The Bulgarians can also, through the actions of the new government, create problems for us in the area of national communities.
Another, much more sensitive aspect is the defense industry. Bulgaria remains one of the key suppliers of Soviet-caliber ammunition, which is critically important for the Ukrainian army. According to European politicians, any slowdown or reconsideration of supplies from Sofia will inevitably disrupt the entire supply chain, creating shortages and reducing the pace of support at the front.
The Bulgarian defense industry is currently largely focused on Ukraine. Their entire production is booked with orders for Ukraine. And I think no one is going to cancel those orders. Because Bulgaria is a country that is even more dependent on European Union money than Hungary. And to play these kinds of games now would be like shooting yourself in the foot right away. Right at the start of the political race.
Moreover, it is precisely the war in Ukraine that has become one of the factors driving the growth of the Bulgarian economy. This is a paradox that people in Sofia understand perfectly well, even if they are not ready to say it out loud. That's why the real policy of the new government will most likely be shaped not by loud statements, but by pragmatic calculation between domestic rhetoric and external obligations.
Russia will most certainly take advantage of the fact that it has won. It will exploit every possible advantage of this aspect. He will have to carefully strike a balance between the electoral base of those who are against this corruption and the existing pro-Russian electoral base he has. So, of course, he faces a complicated hybrid electoral situation. How they will continue to balance is hard to say, especially when it comes to foreign policy.
The most significant and pressing challenge today for Ukraine and the European Union is not even the emergence of another outspoken ally of the Kremlin, but the gradual erosion of unity, where each individual objection makes the collective and unified position weaker and the path to solutions longer and much more difficult.
Unique footage from Ukraine. The drone systems forces have shown the combat work of the so-called middle strike crews, about the effective strikes that are costing the Russian budget millions of dollars, almost every night, as we have already reported. But for the first time on your screens, here is video footage of the deployment and preparation of the aircraft for combat missions. The commander of the drone systems forces, Madyar, has already warned the Russians that in March, pilots from 4 more units will join the so-called deep strikes in the swamps of the Russian Federation. Now, their number at the front has increased to 6. Since the beginning of this year, 513 videos of strikes, middle strikes by drones have been published. By the way, analysts have calculated that over the past year, the Russian Ministry of Defense has already claimed about 20 times that they had completely destroyed the assembly sites for long-range UAVs. At the same time, in March, the drone forces set a record against the enemy, launching more than 7,000 drones. Residential buildings. The best protection for Putin's factories. Last night in Syzran, people saw firsthand the consequences of Russia's military aggression against Ukraine. The local air defense forces were apparently trying so hard to protect the Syzran oil refinery that they ended up destroying an apartment building. The Syzran Telegram channel, which reports on the danger of UAVs and their flyovers, stated that due to the operation of electronic warfare equipment, the drone went off course and crashed into a residential building. Part of the building entrance collapsed and several rescue teams were dispatched to the scene of the incident. There is no information about casualties yet. Per the Syzran radar telegram channel, this isn't the only building hit by electronic warfare. A structure also partially collapsed at another address, but Syzran authorities are staying silent. Russia is facing an increasingly serious problem. There are fewer and fewer people available for the war. Recruitment rates are falling and the covert mobilization is not working as expected. The Kremlin is postponing an open decision. Does this mean there is a resource crisis? Stay tuned.
The rate of recruitment into the Russian army is declining. If about 1,200 people were signing contracts daily a year ago, now it's around 1,000. It might seem that the difference is not critical, but experts say this is already a systemic trend. And it points to the main issue. The resource that sustains the war is gradually being depleted. Analyst Vadim Denisenko claims that there are fewer suicide attackers and it will only get worse.
Standing directly on the front lines are the brave Ukrainian defense forces. Their overall military potential is currently incomparable to that of the vast Russian occupation army, as they continue in their strategic defensive operation. The primary and most critical objective of this strategy is centered on the systematic destruction of the enemy's manpower on the battlefield. The fundamental concept behind this approach is that if the total number of eliminated Russian occupiers significantly exceeds the current capacity of the Russian mobilization machine to replenish these ongoing losses, and furthermore fails to allow them to form necessary strategic reserves for their army, then the overall offensive potential of the enemy's military forces will inevitably begin to collapse under the pressure, will thus deflate.
As a result, the Kremlin is trying to act more cautiously. For about half a year now, Russia has been testing so-called covert mobilization. People are essentially being forced to sign contracts without an official announcement of mobilization. But even this mechanism is failing. The reasons are not yet clear. Either the process hasn't been fully launched, or Russians themselves are increasingly unwilling to go to war and die. A full-scale mobilization has not yet been announced in Russia, and the reason is not only military but also political.
Over roughly the past 2 years, the primary and central focus when it comes to the process of staffing, the Russian armed forces has been operating through a professional contract-based military system. Russian regions were given corresponding quotas for staffing, which they had to meet by any means necessary, whether through fair methods or foul play. Consequently, they systematically pressured and forced Russian citizens to sign contracts with the Russian army.
Against the backdrop of widespread dissatisfaction among Russians, there is a risk that discontent in the country will continue to grow. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky states that the restriction of social networks in Russia is directly related to preventing uprisings. The plan is large-scale mobilization and an offensive. This means mobilizing people from central cities, including Moscow and St. Petersburg. Among the possible scenarios is a new major offensive against Ukraine, or pressure on other fronts, particularly the Baltic countries. However, this raises another question. NATO's response?
I believe that maybe not all countries would want to support it, but in my opinion, NATO countries will have no choice. Otherwise, there will be no NATO. They will need to unite and respond to what Putin might potentially do. Otherwise, they simply won't have an alliance anymore.
But Russia's key problem remains the persistent shortage of manpower. If the situation does not change by the end of the coming months, the Kremlin will face a choice. Either announce a new wave of mobilization, likely after the State Duma elections, or shift to a prolonged positional war. Both options are far from the swift victory Moscow had hoped for.
So the increase is 30,000, while the losses are 35,000. That's a significant monthly deficit of $5,000. This is exactly the shortfall that is currently preventing them from making up for the understaffing.
It is becoming clear that one of Russia's main bets is failing, the human resource is faltering. And this could become a decisive factor in the further course of the war.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.
In Russia, they continue to humiliate the so-called heroes of the so-called special military operation. In the Tula region, during a raid to identify Roma people, law enforcement officers mistakenly broke into the home of a legless veteran of the special military operation and beat him. According to the soldier's wife, the police twisted her arms while shouting and insulting her. Her husband tried to stop them and a scuffle broke out. The authorities wanted to cover up the case, but the couple managed to get the police investigated under the article for abuse of power. But there is one nuance. Now, the veteran in the wheelchair himself is facing criminal charges. During the scuffle, the hero insulted government officials while they were on duty and stated that he had fought in the war, not for people like them. State racketeering and outright theft of other people's property in the temporarily occupied territories of Ukraine. Russian authorities are seizing and registering as ownerless tens of thousands of apartments and houses belonging to Ukrainians who left because of the war and occupation. This happens even in cases where minor children are registered at the residence. How can people get their property back? Details in our report.
The occupiers are taking the last things people have left from Ukraine. In the temporarily occupied territories, a mass seizure of housing from locals has begun, or to put it simply, racketeering.
The apartment was declared ownerless, and the person lost their documents. Now they are restoring them through the courts.
The Kremlin spares no one. Pensioners, children, and women are at the front of the line. After all, they are the least able to defend themselves. And political views don't matter at all here. You could wrap yourself in the tricolor from head to toe, but the closer your apartment is to the city center, the higher the chance you'll lose it. So, after the adoption of a new law in December, according to which housing where no one resides is transferred to the state, Russians have already come up with a multitude of schemes to deceive the locals. The most popular of these is declaring apartments ownerless, regardless of the documents or even the people inside.
An entire building, even with residents inside. The building was under renovation, which is why, for the most part, people weren't living there. The renovation was completely finished and the entirety of the building was declared ownerless. Now, all of these people have come home, so to speak, to move in and finish their renovations because something was specifically done to the entrances from the outside. In principle, they could move in, but each of them found notices stuck on their building. Dear friends, goodbye. Run and find out what this situation is about.
At the same time, the most acute problem is with the so-called self-declared ownerless properties. Today, in Mariupol. After all, more than anything, Z-patriots from the Russian backwoods dream of moving to the seaside. As of today, there are almost 4,000 such apartments and houses in the city. Most of the properties listed in the registries are apartments whose owners left because of the war. Moreover, the occupation authorities are trying to disguise this legalized racket as the rational use of resources.
During a full 30-day waiting period, we will continue to wait for any relevant information to come forward from any potential owners or legal claimants of this apartment and this property. If this does not happen within that time, we will officially and formally register this property in the Roskadastre system as a piece of ownerless property.
In reality, such apartments, especially in renovated buildings, are in high demand among the occupiers and everyone whom Putin's regime is relocating. They are resettling people to Russify the region.
Basically, public sector workers, the military, the police, and these so-called special military operation participants. So, in other words, our apartments will be handed out to them.
Separate schemes have also been developed for selling the housing. Today, in Mariupol alone, more than 100 Russian construction companies are operating, and their websites list the renovated apartments. But what about the people who used to live there?
Where our homes once stood, there are now pits and broken promises.
Not only were we not given new housing, but they plan to build mortgage apartments on the site of our destroyed homes.
To make the scheme look at least somewhat legal, they change the addresses of the renovated buildings. And when residents come with their old documents, they are told that such a building simply no longer exists.
Today, I will speak only about my own building, Metallurgov 47, 55 families. They wander around the city and the surrounding area.
Why are we being treated this way? What did we go through? There was neither electricity nor water.
I lived at 47 Metallurgov Avenue. So where am I supposed to go now? Tell me, where am I supposed to go? Should I go to the dumpsters? Settle there, or where should I go?
At the same time, lawyers note that the new documents issued by Russian authorities are nothing more than ordinary pieces of paper. They have no legal force, they have no validity whatsoever, even if real money was paid for them.
All financial transactions that involve the transfer of property on behalf of the Russian Federation are considered null and void.
In the end, after the entire region is deoccupied, all of them will be declared null and void. So those who once again believed in documents stamped by the two-headed chicken have simply thrown their money away for nothing.
That's all I have time to tell you for now, but we're not saying goodbye. We'll see you again in just a few hours on the Intrend project. There, I'll talk about the international scandal provoked by Solovyov, statements from Z-bloggers, the destruction of 2 ops, as well as new announcements. Putin's comments about subway derailments in Moscow and other interesting news. See you soon.